Welcome to our latest video in the Adapting to Cultural Style series. I feel that one of the things we should be talking about before we get into different styles on a style continuum is understanding how we develop cross-culturally. At this point in time, there's probably no more topic that's more important in a global world than understanding how we can become more competent working with different people across cultures. If you think a little bit about your personal background, as a small child, you may think back to some of the dinners that you had with your family. There may not have been anybody at the table during your childhood who talked about what it was like to work with people from another country or from a different culture. But if you think of your own experience now, it's probably something you do talk about with your friends and family when you sit down to dinner. What's it like to work with other cultures and people from different countries? This is a big change, and this is part of globalization. So it's worthwhile to know, how skillful are we? How are we growing? To do that, let's talk about the intercultural development continuum. The research behind the intercultural development continuum comes from Dr. Milton Bennett and Dr. Mitch Hammer, both of whom have expanded on this idea over the past 20 years. Now, the intercultural development continuum has 5 distinct stages, 2 of which we call monocultural, the middle one we call minimization, and the final big stage we call multicultural. Let's take a look at some examples of how these might show up in common communication or in common ways of working. In the first case, let's look at a memo coming from our New York office. In this memo, we see a simple statement shared to everyone across the company. We will be using the employee engagement survey from our US vendor globally. It's great. On the surface, this seems to be a pretty standard email. But we might also notice on the surface that it doesn't take into account other cultures and the way other cultures may be thinking about engagement or how they report it in an assessment. Thinking about the next stage, we call this polarization. And there's 2 stages in polarization. The first is defense, and the second is reversal. In both cases, there is a defined sense of definitely there being other people out there. It's an us and them sense. In defense, well, let's look at an example of what defense looks like. Recently in training in Shanghai, we had one of our trainees say to us, if our colleagues in India would just apply common sense, we wouldn't have this problem. They should really learn to be professional like us. We are one way. They are another way. This sense of us and them are 2 different ways of expressing the world, and it's clearly a sign of defense. Reversal is where we often find another culture and, without understanding it completely, treat it as being better than our own. For example, you might have heard things like, people from France are just more romantic than the people here. Or possibly, it's just better over there. These are examples of where we think less of our own culture compared to another, without really thinking of all the complexity and shades of gray. Minimization is the next step in competency, where we've begun to pick up on similarities and differences, but we minimize those differences and emphasize the common senses that we have, the common points. However, we tend to overlook some of the key elements of those differences. Let's look at an example a manager once said to me. He said, I don't care if she, a team member, is from Latin America, Asia, Europe, or Africa. She's part of our team, so I'll treat her like I would anyone else on our team. In this case, the emphasis on our team and how we behave in our team minimizes those differences between cultures and misses it out on some of the richness of different cultures. The later stages, what we call multicultural thinking, begin to accept and appreciate that there are different ways of doing things in different parts of the world. In the case of acceptance, we may not fully know how to leverage and how to make the best of these differences, but we do appreciate that people are different from us. In the final stage, what we call adaptation, we begin to understand and leverage those differences to make the best of them. Let's take a look at what might change if this manager minimization was acting from a multicultural point of view. I understand that she's part of our team, and also that because she's from Latin America, she's a bit different. I understand her expectations of me as a boss are different than my expectations from my boss. So I make sure that when I give directions, I'm more precise. Also, her communication style is more focused on people, which makes our team better at focusing on each other with her as a part of a team. So again, a focus on understanding these differences, appreciating how they work, and making the best use of them in our own team. So what can we do to improve? Well, the first is to sort of get an idea of where are you on your level of competency. If you're in denial, begin to recognize that culture does matter. If you're in polarization, try to understand some of the common points that you have with people in different cultures. If you're in minimization, look for why people behave the way they do. Try to understand the picture more completely. And if you're in acceptance, try to find strategies to navigate some of these cultural differences so that your team can work better together. As always, when working cross-culturally, have fun and enjoy the challenge.